everybody. Can you all hear me? Yep, great. My name's Steve Jennings, and for the next 3 days, I'm going to be introducing the keynotes and keeping you mildly amused. I guess I'm like the warm-up guy, like the band you've never heard of that's, I guess, playing at 10 a.m. in the morning at Roskilde, and everybody's still in their tents or still drunk. But it's fun to do this, and it's an incredible honor, actually, to be asked by the Øredev Organizing Committee to be the host and introduce the keynotes. I want to try something new. I don't think we've ever done this at Øredev before. And I think in stadiums they're called Mexican waves, but we're going to try and do a Swedish wave right now. And what I want to try and do is get a wave that starts at the front, it goes up to the back, and it comes back down. And I need one person to come up here that's got an iPhone that's going to film it. Who's going to come up here with me? Ziggy, come on. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to start down at the front, and I just want the front row to stand up with their arms up, and then I want the rows to kind of consecutively take this wave up to the back. Once you've stood up, we're then going to sit down, and the wave is then going to come back down. So I guess we'll stand up as it goes up, and then as it comes down, you'll all kind of sit down. Let's see if we can pull this off and do something that we can get on YouTube and just show what the spirit of Øredev's all about. And just think of Øredev is a platform, and you're the content. This is about, you know, the participants, the guests, the speakers are going to put the content into Øredev this year. And we're going to start off with a Swedish wave. So, okay, front row, 1, 2, 3, go. Come on, back down. Bring it back. That was fun. Yay. So the theme for Øredev 2012 is Vive la Rebellion. And film more? No, you go. It's good to have you up here. Thank you, Ziggy. So the theme for Øredev 2012 is Vive la Rebellion. And last night I was at the speakers' dinner, and I tend to go on a little bit, ramble on, and I was kind of talking about you know, the times that we live in, that we really are living in unique times. Many of you in this room, in fact, I would say just about every person that I'm looking at right now, are in some way, shape, or form contributing and are architects of the digital revolution. It's probably the most significant moment in economic history since our great-grandparents were the architects of the Industrial Revolution. So these are really, really special times to be a computer scientist, a software engineer, a developer. And sometimes you lose sight of the reach that you have with the things that you're building, the things that you're creating. It's astonishing, really, that, you know, 3 guys can huddle around their laptops and in a matter of weeks create an app, and it can be released, and it can touch literally millions of people. It's incredibly disruptive. And the opportunities that you people are creating, the things that you do, the things that you see are potentially things that are going to change the world. The first speaker that's coming up this morning, David Rowan from Wired magazine. When you think about magazines like Wired and what they do, they tell the stories of what you guys are doing. They tell the stories of what's going on in the world of technology and software. And there are remarkable stories that have emerged since we've developed algorithms and technologies that can do really remarkable things. And personally, I think the most remarkable thing that has come out of our ability to work with algorithms is probably mapping the human genome, having a blueprint of the entire human body. And I think as we understand what that means and how to really use this data, we will start to find cures for some of the illnesses that have proved to be very, very difficult to deal with, especially cancer, illnesses that affect young children. And all of this comes from algorithms, from software, from people that are able to work with these tools and paint the right kind of pictures to connect them up in the right way. So Øredev 2012 is Vive la Rebellion. Vive la Rebellion is really about capturing the zeitgeist, capturing the times that we live in, and being bold in the work that you do, not being afraid to try new things. You know, we live in this world, especially in software, of launch and learn, doing things very fast, constantly iterating. I guess you're really never done. Nothing really ever gets done anymore. It's just this iterative process and this incredible learning journey that we're all on. And I think that's about as much as I want to say for now. I'm going to be back up here this evening introducing the second keynote for the day. So the first speaker is David Rowan. David is the UK editor for Wired magazine. I don't think there's... Stick your hand up if you've never heard of Wired. No. One hand. That was pulled up by a string. So I think, you know, most of us are familiar with Wired magazine. It's the kind of magazine that a lot of us probably buy when we're about to make a transatlantic flight, when we're on a long train journey. It's a subscription that comes to the office. It carries remarkable stories. It carries remarkable stories. And David's going to come up and speak with us now about storytelling, about the work that he does with Wired magazine, about the world that we live in, really. So without further ado, we're going to have a little bit of introduction music, and then David's going to come up and speak to us.
So there's been some pretty exciting news coming out of the United States over the last few hours. But I want to tell you about some less exciting news from the US from a few days ago. So it's extraordinary that a natural disaster can still paralyze probably the world's most technologically advanced nation. It's not just people dying, stores running out of food, hospitals having to evacuate. But what I found extraordinary was a remarkable and spontaneous set of actions in the hours and days after the first hurricane warnings from the geek community, from the software world, from hackers, from people who thought, hey, I could do something useful here. And over the last few days, we've had various non-profit groups, various academic institutions, and various individuals go online and try and help do their bit to solve the problem. So we've had real-time multimedia streams through maps like this one. We've had Sandy's List, helping collate offers of help and requests for help, with hashtags created, Sandy Aid. We've had Google Docs. This one is Hurricane Hackers. Hurricane Hackers started by somebody at MIT, Sasha Constanza-Chock, thinking, right, there's lots of goodwill here, and there's lots of real need. Let's use our networks, let's use the net to connect them. So there's everything from maps of all the charging stations available in New York City, lists of the shelters available, people who have been separated from families. Go onto Twitter and look at Hurricane Hackers, the hashtag. It's extraordinary. This is all generous. This is all people giving their time. Groups like Geeks Without Bounds organize 6 hackathons in a weekend to see what they could usefully do. There's Crisis Camp, encouraging people to volunteer, to get together, organize events, to participate even if they can't turn up in person. And of course, pretty much everything is being open sourced. People are putting the code for their projects up on GitHub. They're helping, among other things, keep track of which schools are open, any new apps that people are creating. So I think it's really quite exciting to see people thinking of social good beyond their personal interests, how we can do something useful. And I guess that's the theme of what I'm going to talk about this morning. So we're all caught up in our daily jobs, our deadlines, the expectations of our colleagues, sometimes the politics of the office. But I think we should step back occasionally and work out with our particular skill sets, and there's an awful lot of skill in this room, what we can do to the greater public service, what we can do that will leave a real legacy. Do you want your legacy to be making pixels to help people pass the time? You know, it's fun, but is that really going to fulfill your ultimate potential? So we can be creative in our day jobs. We can engage millions of people. But I think there's a rebellious streak in this room that can make you more into heroes. I think we can do more than help the merchants of the world sell more teeth whitening kits or more cellulite reduction courses. But this is where a lot of our software resources are going. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think we can do more. More than help e-commerce retailers. More than help build communities that ultimately are going to have a big commercial impact. I think we should think about the social impact. So Mark Andreessen, the man behind the Mosaic web browser, who's invested very early on in some immensely successful internet businesses, he got it right last year when he wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal. And he said that software is eating the world. He said more and more major businesses and industries are being run on software and delivered as online services, from movies to agriculture to national defense. And over the next 10 years, he said, I expect more industries to be disrupted by software. We've got maybe 2 billion people on broadband, but in the next decade, there'll be 5 billion with smartphones. And that's going to be transformative. And he was in particular looking at the impact on healthcare and education. But it's going to hit every industry. It's hitting mine. It's going to hit everyone in Malmo and beyond. So I think you guys have won. Software engineers are pretty much running the world now. You've had an impact. You're the rock stars. So maybe when you were 14 and it was the jocks at school who were getting all the hot dates, hey, you are those rock stars. You have power, you have political influence, you have massive economic influence. There's been a huge shift. And I think that's grounds for celebration. I think it shows what intelligent, smart applications of knowledge can do to create services and businesses and products that millions of people like and need and rely on. But I also think that gives you a great opportunity to use your rebellious nature, and produce things that will have massive public interest and impact. But first of all, I think we have to unpick some of the closed nature of the software world. The language you use. I'm not a software geek. I can code the odd HTML tag. But there's a barrier to entry. Language is the barrier to entry. So I think the first thing we need to do is make it much easier for the non-geeks to have access to the magical tools that you have access to. And there's some interesting early stage projects happening in an attempt to do this. So this is Sepp Kamvar, who is at MIT Media Lab, successful entrepreneur and engineer. He's inventing a new coding language, which he's calling Dog. And the point of Dog is it's a language that is much more natural. It follows human conversation. It's much more accessible for any non-specialist to learn. And I think the more people you allow into the tent, the more creative we'll be, the more problems will be solved. Just to give you an idea of Dog. So these are some of the commands in capital letters. So if he wants to see what people from MIT are saying online, on their blogs, this simple line of code. Listen to people from MIT via HTTP for posts. Hey, even I can understand that. Why should you have to relearn from scratch every time you want to learn a new language? I think we need some common grammar. We're in an open world increasingly. A lot of the most successful projects are no longer locked away inside corporations. And I think it's that openness that is the key to creating real lasting value. And I'll give you some examples. So I get to meet some pretty interesting rebels. This is Swati Ramanathan from India, who started this non-profit called IPaidAbribe.com. She wanted to eliminate corruption. It's a pretty bold ambition. She's in Bangalore. So she thought the best way to do this was create an open platform where people crowdsource data on the prices, what local officials are asking for. And when I last had a look at it, there were 16,000 reports. And that becomes quite a powerful tool, that open data. She was starting to get police chiefs in various areas of India contacting her saying, well, I knew they were taking bribes, but I didn't realize that was the price. Since then, it's been adopted elsewhere, in Kenya, in Pakistan. I like that idea of using that rebellious streak to create a global online coalition to fight corruption through transparency. I think we can learn from that. I think we can learn from Felix Hauser, a Chilean lawyer. He set up something called the Smart Citizen Foundation. He wanted to use technology to help citizens access information about the government. Again, a non-profit. So the projects included an app that allows you to submit anonymous freedom of information requests to various government departments. There's an open database of politicians' interests. And he also did a very cool thing with an iPhone and a helium balloon. When there were student protests in July last year, he created the Citizen Balloon, streaming images back from the iPhone. And the Occupy movement copied that soon after. There's a project set up between the University of Michigan and the University of Waterloo in Canada. This is called Telex, telex.cc. This is a way of helping dissidents avoid censorship. It tags internet traffic, works with foreign internet service providers, redirects content to anonymizing services. And you can achieve great things. You can help people in Beijing watch YouTube. But think of the possibilities. Software engineers, a smart idea, an open platform, and a problem solved. So there's lots of really good examples of this online. Transparency International organized a bunch of hackathons recently, analyzing politicians' assets, monitoring what's happening in the courts in places where things are not always open. Some of the projects that came out of it, this is just in a few hours, this Ukrainian project to try and show where people in the health services were demanding bribes for treatment. Are you the lucky guy who's received good medical treatment at a public hospital for free, not paying bribes? Congratulations. Now you have the opportunity to say thank you to your doctor for his good job. You send in reports. The doctor gets a postcard. This is in Colombia, trying to create transparency around elections. This is in Budapest. There's a project, again, part of this same hackathon. Create an iPhone app that shows you where in the city there are corrupted institutions. So we're at an interesting time when in Berlin, the Pirate Party can replace the Greens and get 9% of the vote on platforms including Let's Privatize Religion. I think we should think a bit more like the pirates, because some of our institutions, if not corrupted, are not functioning necessarily in the public interest. And I think we have the tools, we have the energy to solve those problems. So there's some remarkable things happening when you create a platform that's open, that reaches people who want to get involved. Kickstarter is a great example. It's empowering. It was originally creative performers, people wanting to make a documentary. It's now physical hardware as well, but just have a look at Amanda Palmer, musician, trying to fund her next album. She said she needed $100,000. She got 1.2 million. And that was everything from, give me $1, you'll get a free download. Give me $1,000, I'll meet you for tea. $10,000, he'll perform in your house. It's happening to hardware as well, this open idea, the open sourcing. So 3D printing is in the early stages of going mainstream, but it's going to transform all sorts of industries in the next 5 years. But the MakerBot got this gentleman on the cover of US Wired this month. This is one of your other speakers as well, Ho-Jun Song. You'll like his talk. He's open sourcing a satellite. That little satellite he's going to be sending up into space. Financed by selling t-shirts, but he'll tell you more about that. And I suppose one of the classic examples of being open is the TED conference that decided to abrogate power. TEDx, you do, use our brand, we don't have quality control. But the TEDx movement has proved an astounding success. Not just generating mass interest in what TED, the mothership, is doing, boosting demand for tickets for the main event, but also generating content. A lot of the speakers on the main TED stage have been discovered through the local TED Talks. It's a really great example of how being open and being bold and thinking in a rebellious way can lead to real-world business results as well as social results. This is Rob McEwen, who set up a Canadian gold mining company called Goldcore. And about a decade ago, the business started slowing down. They'd mined all the lucrative seams of their mines in Ontario. There's one mine where they thought, this is not going to be so good for us in the future. But he'd been at an MIT discussion where he'd learned about Linux, he'd learned about open source. And he thought, I'm going to try an experiment. I'm going to put a bunch of our geological data out there on the internet, about 400 megs, I think, and create a challenge. I'm going to come up with some prize money, $575,000. And anybody who can use our vast amounts of data to tell us where we should be mining, they'll get a prize. So he put all this data up, lots of criticism about him doing this because it's proprietary, it's secret. And he had about 1,000, 1,100 people, teams in about 50 countries enter, many of them with no geological knowledge. But they used the data to spot patterns. They found dozens, scores of places that the company didn't realize had a lot of gold relatively accessible. And he concluded that for the $575,000 in prize money, they accessed maybe $3 billion worth of gold. So you've got to take a risk. So Angry Birds, there's a good side to them too. Peter Westerbacher, I was talking to last week, and he was explaining in Finland, where he came from, they have this great concept called tolkut, from the word from tolku. I don't know how many Finns there are in here today. But tolkut is this expectation that people will get together and volunteer their knowledge, volunteer their time to do things for the local community. It's called barnstorming in English. And it's not a unique idea to Finland. There's similar words in lots of other languages. But I think tolkut is a really inspiring concept for the software world to use to develop products that solve real problems. And I'm inspired in this by projects such as this one. So Random Acts of Kindness, rhok.org. You can define a problem. Teams can work on a solution. They have meetups. It's got big backers. It's got Google and Microsoft and NASA and the World Bank and Yahoo. And they have app contests and they have hackathons. But they try and solve real significant problems because the people on these networks have specialist skills. Some of the projects worth looking up. Real-time estimation of how dangerous an earthquake zone is. Real-time image streaming from disaster zones. Something called I Am Not Okay, a way to get messages from emergency zones so people can say if they're in trouble. So I'm going to look at 3 specific areas where I think your expertise and rebellious nature can cause very useful disruptions. And they're about education, about the way government is run, and about health. But let's start with education. So you've probably seen the Khan Academy. Salman Khan putting some pretty amateurish videos, science videos online for his niece, and suddenly it takes off. 205 million lessons delivered. There's a trend going on here. So we've got the tools, we've got the platform to create a massive free educational resource. And people who want to learn are engaging, they're committing their time, they're concentrating. And it's leading to some businesses as well. Sebastian Thrun from Stanford and Google, one of the people behind the self-driving car, recently set up Udacity, which is a business, but it's also giving away educational courses. The first big one was an artificial intelligence course. And they're still working on how it's going to work as a business. You probably charge for certification, but anybody can take that course as long as you have internet connection. And so they're getting people from all over the world who'd never be able to afford an American Ivy League education. And a lot of them from places in Asia, from places in Africa. They're completing the courses. And this is Daphne Kohler, who again has a startup called Coursera, where she's building a business around opening up knowledge, education, creating a platform to help everybody benefit from the knowledge that is there. So I think we can find smaller ways. We don't have to set up huge businesses to transfer our knowledge to the next generation, partly to inspire, partly to empower. So I like projects like Coder Dojo, free and open learning to young people, especially in programming. You can mentor, you can start a local unit. It's all over the world now. How can you contribute? I see a lot of male faces in this room, but there's no reason that women can't be as effective coders as men, but they need the role models. They need being shown that it's an option. So there's another movement called Rails Girls, which is organizing, again, locally run coder meetings where they're focusing on young women and girls who are still at school. Try and make them excited about the possibility. So I keep coming back to MIT. We did a special issue about the Media Lab last month. And what really got me was Joey Ito, the new boss, is seeing it now as an open institution. It goes beyond the walls of the Media Lab. They're reaching out to build networks where they have expertise, whether it's in the streets of Detroit or India. And I think that open nature of education has to be the future. Here's another example.
Technation Challenge is a program that inspires girls to see themselves not just as users of technology, but as inventors, designers, builders, and entrepreneurs. Through Technovation, teams of high school girls work with professional women in the high-tech industry, and they design mobile phone apps over the course of 9 weeks. At the end of the course, they get to present their prototypes and their business plans to a panel of high-profile judges at an exciting pitch night event.
The program is made possible only by the dedication and support of our mentors, teaching assistants, and instructors.
They've provided approximately 3,000 hours of support over these last 9 weeks. Most of them are volunteering their time after work. That's 3,000 hours in 9 weeks for all of these girls. It's amazing.
I see them as people who will go in there with an idea, learn the technical background, leave school, create a company, and then they can employ women and minorities, thereby changing the perception of computer science.
I think we've all came a long way from knowing nothing to starting from scratch and then creating this app. I think I'm really proud of you guys.
I would like to see this everywhere. So I think this should be something that's implemented nationally because I think for young girls to actually touch code, is critical for them to know that it's not as difficult as it seems.
What's to stop you doing something similar? You got the knowledge. You're inspiring. So there's lots of projects like this. Slight iterations, people taking different approaches. This is one called Hackasaurus. And if you're a data specialist, there's also some fantastic opportunities. So here's a project I'm really quite excited about, called DataKind. So we've got some great examples already. OpenStreetMap, the public creating the maps. This is Paris. But it has real-world implications. It can actually save lives. So when the Haiti earthquake hit, there weren't very many up-to-date maps of the back streets, so the rescuers had a problem. They didn't know where they would find people whose lives they still might be able to save. And so a call went out on the networks, and through OpenStreetMap, lots of people who had satellite images, older maps, they got together and collaborated and created a map. You can't very clearly see, but the green and the red are the existing understood roads. But then about 10 days later, the community created a much more detailed map. The white are the little tiny back streets, and the blue are the settlements, you know, little tent encampments. And this was all done by people all over the world on the network. And the rescuers said that helped them reach people and save lives. So if you can collaborate using a bit of code, a bit of understanding about data, a bit of visualization skills, you can do all sorts of exciting things. You can do what Stamen in San Francisco have done, map out where crime is. Particular crimes, granular down to the street corner. You can do what they're doing in Antwerp, which is a heat-detecting plane flying over the city, showing where energy is being used most and least efficiently. So a little peer pressure against your neighbors who are wasting energy. Let me talk in particular about what I think this movement could do for government. So there's already some exciting small projects happening. In Boston, for instance, they're using a smartphone app to help record where there are potholes in the street. The idea is the accelerometer detects through street bump where your taxi journey or your car journey is not so smooth, and it sends the data back. That's fun, but that's not really where this is all going. People like Rachel Stern in New York organizing a big app competition, putting out lots of public data, lots of city data, and encouraging people to come up with solutions to solve it. Problems like how you get around the city efficiently, leading to apps that people are creating like Roadify. Problems such as not knowing where you should avoid because they have food hygiene issues. So there's a Don't Eat At service people have created where you check into a restaurant that's had a poor health report, you get a text message. So once you give people data, they do all sorts of surprising things with this. So this is a map showing where people are stopped and searched. In San Francisco, they're using sensors in the street that can detect if there's a parked car above them, so you have a real-time map of where you should be parking if you're looking for a parking space. Again, it saves traffic jams, it saves pollution. You're not driving around the circle. It's a very simple use of technology to solve a problem. This is Jennifer Polker, who set up something called Code for America, which I think should inspire a lot of us. She wants government to work more like a startup, and she's encouraging people like you to go and do the sort of coding work you do for your employer, for Boston, for Seattle, for Chicago, dealing with transport and education and street art. One of the things that Code for America built was a solution to a problem in Boston. If you're trying to send a child to school in Boston, there was no efficient way of comparing schools online. So rather than go through the official channels, Code for America backed something called Discover Boston Public Schools. And she said if we'd done this through the government, it would have taken 2 years and cost $2 million. We did it in 2 months and it cost pretty much nothing. You start to see why there's a lack of trust in government. Look at that simple and beautiful app and contrast it with a typical government website. What can you build to help all of us? Some interesting experiments happening in Singapore, which is a bit of an incubation lab for the digital city. So they're working with the Sensible Cities Lab to map out where urban heat is generated, using cell phone data localized to show the impact on a city of specific events, where taxis are during the rain. This is an isochronic map of the city according to how long it takes you to get from one bit to another. So last summer, there was an open hackathon coding competition called Up. Get lots of smart people together, take their knowledge of design, of user interaction, of coding, of building apps, see what they come up with. example.
At Up Singapore, we managed to work through 18 million lines of taxi data, and this is what we found. 15% of the taxi rides had similar start and end locations. This prompted us to create Cooperate, a dynamic ride-sharing application which allows people to share their ride itineraries.
So Beth Novak from the US talks about opening up the API of government. She says the next great superpower will combine the hierarchy of the institution with diversity, chaos, and the excitement of networks, and solve a few problems on the way. In Downing Street, this is Rowan Silva, advisor to David Cameron, wanting an era of open source government, using technology to recast politics for the new century. I think we could all do our bit. So we talked about education, we talked about politics. I'll talk briefly about what this revolution can do for health. If you build a network, if you create open tools, you can empower individuals, patients. So there's a network online called Cure Together, for instance, for people suffering from various health problems. And one thing they did was crowdsource their own personal experiences in response to depression treatments. So whilst the pharmaceutical industry will be telling you you should be having some of those products on the left-hand side, that's least effective and least popular, the most popular and most effective treatments were actually exercise and sleeping more and talking with family and friends. By the way, alcohol and caffeine, not so good. So there's a few of these networks, patients like me, again, hundreds of thousands of patients sharing personal data points, doing what the pharmaceutical industry isn't doing, sharing openly. Projects like the Netra, this is Ramesh Raskar from the camera culture part of the Media Lab. Again, he's developing very, very low-cost devices, a few dollars, that slip onto a smartphone and can diagnose retinal problems, problems with cornea. They can go out into the field, places where people don't get medical treatment.
Each day,
like this.
millions of Americans carry and use inhalers to relieve asthma symptoms. How often a person uses their inhaler indicates how well their disease is managed. The Spiroscout is a small device that attaches easily to most inhalers. It uses GPS to automatically determine the exact time and location when the inhaler is used, because revealing where people use their inhalers provides valuable clues about environmental exposures that cause attacks. Our tools help patients, physicians, and public health agencies systematically track asthma in real time so that they can put the latest information to work to better understand and control the disease.
Again, solving a problem that if you have asthma, you can't always predict where it's going to hit. I think we should cut the rest of the agenda and just turn today into one big hackathon, because I think we could solve some major problems. So the algorithms, without the human energy, without your sensitivities, the algorithms aren't going to do it. Algorithms are cool, but they're a bit flawed. If you see the algorithms based on Google search results, you see why the Turing test hasn't quite been cracked yet. So, this is what the network is looking for, and the algorithm. Dinosaurs were made up by the CIA. If you type in "I have just" in the autocomplete on Google, this is what the world is looking for. I'm not even going to tell you about "Can I get pregnant?" So, I've got nothing against algorithms. They can be generally really quite useful. If I go to Amazon, sometimes I get some really good recommendations. Sometimes the recommendations by the algorithm are maybe a bit more revealing. If you're buying communion wafers, just have a look at what's recommended at the bottom right. I'm not going to comment about that. No, I think it's about humans, and it's about your skills. So there's a few other rebellious heroes that I think we should celebrate. Technologists based around networks like this, Developers for Good. Or this one, people using AI skills to try and solve some of the development problems, to predict food shortages, droughts. So some of the projects they've been working on, the causal structure of food shortage in Uganda, modeling catastrophe in Rwanda using people's mobile phones. Add your own project. Join in. Get involved. But they were all, stuff we could probably do in our lunch break. I'm now just going to leave you with some people doing some really extraordinary, rebellious things. How that software mindset is disrupting massive, massive industries.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Stage 1. We have liftoff of the Falcon 9. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Starting pitch kick. Yeah, the power systems are nominal.
Set descent.
Dragon Solar Array deployment. Solar has deployed.
They're initiating the capture of the Dragon. Standing by. Capture is confirmed.
So what's great about that is those people cheering aren't NASA employees. They're not government employees. They're civilians, because that is the privately funded Dragon in May going up to the space station, run by a private business called SpaceX. This is the young man who would go on to form SpaceX. South African, went to the States when he was 17, Elon Musk. So as well as running this business, he's also running a couple of other businesses. So there's Tesla Motors, trying to build a cool but viable electric car business, and Solar City, which is the biggest supplier of solar panels in the US, about to do a $200 million IPO. So he's a man who's 41, who's had 2 divorces, and he's got 5 children, and this guy's a rebel. He was interviewed by Business Week a few weeks ago saying, is there anything he'd still like to achieve? And he said, well, I'd quite like a girlfriend, but she must agree to no more than 10 hours of my time a week. But what he has is a mindset I think we need more of, which is a healthy disregard for the impossible. Not being told you can't do that. And that idea of a healthy disregard for the impossible has been propagated in Silicon Valley, particularly by people like Larry Page, who, when he was at the University of Michigan, he went on a course taught by these people, Leadership. It's a leadership course, and their mission statement is to create leaders who have integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And if you have this mindset, it's extraordinary. So in Google, that's how they build. They want to do things that solve global problems, and they're not going to be set back, whether it's Google Glass, whether it's a blind man in a self-driving car. So they've done a couple of 100,000 miles on the highways of California with their self-driving cars. And this mindset is encouraged by posters you see in Building 43 in Google's headquarters in Mountain View. You know, what if your browser had 5 senses? What will be possible when the web is 100 times faster? I think we can be inspired by this thinking as well. If you go into Facebook's building, there are posters like this. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Move fast and break things. Done is better than perfect. And even questioning existential questions about what we are. Is this a technology company? To which someone scribbled, no, it's a poster-making company. So these rebels, they're not necessarily new. Thomas Edison, more than a century ago, had a similar spirit. Go for what people say is impossible. So I managed to get hold of his notebooks, and this is from 1888, his to-do list. So as well as, the phonograph, there's things in here like build an electric piano, build artificial ivory, artificial silk, let's do that one as well. He achieved a fair bit. And it's this mindset that you're not going to be set back if something doesn't work, if you fail. So James Dyson had 5,126 failures before he finally got his cyclone vacuum cleaner working. And most of us probably have one. So I know we're talking, not very sexy things like vacuum cleaners. We're not talking about flying cars and jetpacks. But that mindset, I think, is important. People like Ed Boyden at the Media Lab, who are setting out to try and solve the brain, creating tools that can unravel what's happening in the brain. Oh, by the way, I said flying cars. There is actually now a flying car about to come to market. This is the Terrafugia. Cost you a couple of €100,000, but the wings fold up, and it should be available next year. Oh, and jetpacks? Yep. Get those as well. This is the Martin jetpack. It's on the cover of our magazine this month. Goes up to 5,000 feet. That's the way to commute to work. Nothing's impossible. What about mining asteroids for minerals? That's not impossible.
With technological advances that are coming out of exponential technologies and investors willing to bear the risk, small teams are now able to do what only governments and large corporations could do before. Our vision is to catalyze humanity's growth both on and off the Earth. We're breaking new ground. Now is the time for us to gain access to these resources. And at the end, the entire human race will be the beneficiary as we expand our reach beyond the Earth into the solar system.
So that's Peter Diamandis, one of the people behind Singularity University. But if Planetary Resources, which has quite a lot of big backers like Google, is looking to mine asteroids, I don't see why that's impossible. So I'm just going to leave you with some things I've noticed when I meet quite a lot of these entrepreneurs, these rebels, these pirates. There's a few strands I see. They're people who go for the big problem. They have a need to leave their mark on the world. They're generally quite obsessed people. Money's not the thing. They may end up with quite a lot of it, but that's not what's doing it for them. If they're not literally an outsider, an immigrant, they often think like one. They had people there early on who showed them things were not impossible. They were resilient when things went wrong. They built a network. It's about who you're connected to. Yeah, there's this one. And I don't know if you've met many really pushy, ambitious people in the software business. So we will solve these problems. We will build the tricorder that will diagnose your health problems that Mr. Spock is wearing. That's not the new iPad mini. And we will build it because there's now a prize competition funded by Qualcomm. It's an X Prize, $10 million, and teams are even now competing to create a single device that will diagnose your health. So rebel and have that healthy disregard for the impossible. Thanks for listening. And did you want some questions? Who's in charge? How are we doing for time for questions?
Does anybody have any questions for David? If you do, just stick your hand up. No questions? Whereabouts? Where are you? There we go. Do you want to come down here? Stop hiding in the shadows. It's great. Come on up. There you go.
Hi. I have a question. You talk a lot about using open data. What are your thoughts about Gapminder, that Hans Rosling are working on to make public data from governments open? How do you feel about that project?
It's great. The more the merrier. I mean, it's about creating a mindset where both public officials and also corporate bosses realize that you can't hide behind walls, that eventually everything will have an expectation of being open. So you have to tell the truth about policy. So corruption inside an organization is found out at an earlier stage. And again, if Gapminder makes it much more accessible to a lot more people, what's happening in the development world, in sub-Saharan Africa, what's happening in Eastern Europe, then that leads to change. That leads to more informed decision making. And I think there's a difference between having data and making it accessible. You need visualization tools. You need to tell a story around data. You need to simplify it. You need to make it information, not just data. So, good luck, Hans. Thank you.
Anybody else want to come up here and ask David anything? No? Shy?
Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.